Hey everybody, this is Matt from Island Press and welcome to the Global Street Design Guide webinar. We're glad that you tuned in and also glad we could offer this second session for people who are outside of the Eastern Time Zone. The moderators today will have Ankita Chatra and Fabrizio Prati from GDCI, which of course is part of NACTO. I want to start out by thanking all the partners who helped us put this webinar on. I want to thank, of course, GDCI and NACTO, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and of course my colleagues at Island Press. We appreciate everyone's support. So let's take a look at the agenda for today. I'll introduce the moderators in a second, and they'll in turn introduce Skye Duncan. She's the director of GDCI, and she'll give us a nice sort of 20-minute overview of the Global Street Design Guide. After that, we'll hear from two case studies from the guide. We'll hear from Robin Abad Acobillo and Ilaria Salvadori from Pavement to Parks in San Francisco. And then we'll hear from Amit Bhatt and Sarika Pandabhat from WRI in India. And of course, feel free to submit your questions via GoToWebinar. We plan to devote a fair amount of time after the presentations for the discussion, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And the webinar is recording. We'll post the recording to our respective websites in the coming days. We'll be sure to alert you so you can revisit it if you want or send to colleagues. Very quickly, I want to call your attention to the Island Press Urban Resilience Project. The goal of the project is to raise awareness of issues that lie at the intersection of climate change, urbanism, and equity. We do this by publishing original short form content in different media outlets like Grist, The Guardian, Root, many others. So if you're interested in learning more, be sure to follow us on social media. You can visit us online at islandpress.org/URP or send a note to the email address on the screen. And you can get a copy of the Global Street Design Guide for 20% off at islandpress.org. Just use the promo code 2NACTO at checkout. And okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderators, Ankita and Fabrizio from GDCI. Before GDCI, Ankita worked as an urban designer for the planning studio at Skidmore, Owing, and Merrill in San Francisco, where she contributed towards mixed-use planning and transit-oriented urban projects. Her work experience varies greatly from detailed architectural design projects to large-scale planning efforts throughout India, China, Malaysia, and the United States. And Fabrizio's work concentrates on the field of alternative mobility, sustainable planning and design, as well as resiliency. He worked for about 5 years in two preeminent design and planning firms in Paris, where he addressed sustainability and mobility issues in transit-oriented developments and eco-districts in France and internationally. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to our moderators.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome all. Thanks for joining us from all around the world. And of course, thanks to all the presenters. I'm going to now introduce our first presenter, Skye Duncan, which is the director of the Global Designing Cities Initiative here at the National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO. Skye has been leading a multi-year program funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies to develop the new Global Street Design Guide and to provide technical assistance to cities around the world on safe and sustainable street design. Skye is an urban designer with over a decade of experience in architecture, urban design, planning, and landscape architecture, and spent 7 years working as a senior urban designer at the New York City Department of City Planning in their Office of Chief Urban Designer. So I'm going to now hand it over to Skye, who's going to present the Global Street Design Guide.
Thanks so much, Fabrizio, and thank you, Matthew, to you and the team at Island Press for hosting us here today. We're thrilled to be giving the second round of our presentation on the Global Street Design Guide and talking a bit about how we can work to change streets to ultimately work towards changing the world. And what I'd like to kind of bring everyone's attention to is how can we all start to look at the potential of transforming our existing streets and really restore the role of the street as the lifeblood of our communities that it once was. I think many people on this webinar probably realize that as our largest continuous network of public open space, we've done a pretty bad job over a number of decades of making the most of this space, and we really need to look at making better and more efficient use of our street spaces. Now, of course, when we think of our streets, we can think about many lenses. Our streets help us move about the city and get access to our jobs and our schools every day. They support environmental sustainability, so our decisions around our street designs impact the air quality the air that we breathe, the quality of the water in our cities, and you know, our overall ecosystems of our cities. And of course, the economic sustainability. Our streets help our businesses flourish, help us able to deliver our goods every day. And as each and every one of us step out into the streets, we find that they impact our everyday experience, our livability and quality of life. And of course, the lens that we'd like to talk about today primarily is looking at public health and safety. And this is because of this very scary number. Now, some of you may know this. 1.25 million people die every single year on our streets. That's one person every 30 seconds. And these are completely preventable deaths. And so often we find that they're a result of us designing our cities and designing spaces like this, where we've forgotten that human beings are at the heart and the center of our cities. We've forgotten to provide space for our most vulnerable users and created environments where people have to risk their lives every day to cross the street, to go to work, to go to school, where our most vulnerable users with no protection have to compete in this space with speeding vehicles that have a lot more protection and armor around them. And we've created spaces where our great aunts and our grandmothers or our young children have to walk 4 or 5 or 6 times as far just across the street. So we've turned them into 3rd or 4th class citizens in their own environments. But luckily there's many examples around the world that we can look to, whether it's Melbourne in Australia or Sao Paulo in Brazil, where we can get a better balance between our users of our streets. Examples like Helsinki in Finland, where we see this main street with large, wide sidewalks that invite entire families to walk down next to each other. Or the shared street in Auckland, where the pedestrian is the king or queen and cars are allowed to use the space. They're invited, but to do so at very slow speeds where they're more aware of each other and the movement of other users. And some examples where cars and vehicles are removed altogether, like this one in Bandung in Indonesia, or Bogota in Colombia. And most recently in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, we're starting to show how easily these spaces can be transformed to better balance the use between our vulnerable users and sustainable mobility. And this idea of sharing lessons and encouraging people to steal and borrow ideas from each other rather than reinvent the wheel is a big premise of the work we're doing as part of the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety. Some of you may know that Bloomberg committed $125 million towards global road safety in 2014 to try and combat some of these numbers. And we're doing this from a number of strategies, whether it's enforcement, looking at data and improving data collection so that we know who's dying and where and why and what the cause is, to media strategies that help people understand the dangers of drinking and driving or speeding or the importance of wearing their helmet and seatbelts. But our team, we're working with Embark, World Resource Institute and World Bank's Global Road Safety Facility to look at safe streets and safe mobility. So how do we rethink our infrastructure of our cities to create safer environments and safer behavior? And for us, a big part of this was the first year where we produced the Global Street Design Guide, which we're going to give you some more information on. And then we've also started doing technical assistance in 3 cities this past year, in Brazil, in Colombia, and in Ethiopia. But to get back to the Global Street Design Guide, now this was quite a task, as you might imagine. but we ended up with 3 overall strategies where we think high level around streets, around the concept and definitions, the process of shaping streets and who's involved and how we measure and evaluate them. We have a large section on design guidance, looking at key principles, the importance of designing for place and for people, and then more technical guidance around utilities and infrastructure, operational and management strategies and design controls. And finally, a large portion of the book is around street transformations, and I'm going to show you some of these, the before and after, of how we can transform the spaces that we have. And our goal is to complement the many incredible documents that are already out there in the world to help us work together to support the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular, number 3, to try and halve the number of global deaths on our roads by 2020. That's a big, big challenge, and 2020 is just around the corner, so we have a lot of work to do. And of course, number 11, looking at how we can provide safe access and affordable, accessible access to sustainable transportation systems. And as we shift from the global agenda to local action, we ask and we hope that this document can inspire leaders, provide enough technical guidance to inform practitioners, and be accessible enough to empower communities to know what to ask for and demand of their streets. And our premise is to take this hierarchical pyramid that has existed for too many decades, where the car has been the king and people have almost been forgotten, and to invert that on its head and to put people first, to prioritize our most vulnerable users, our elderly, our children, and our people with disabilities as the top priority in every design. To then look at how we can promote sustainable mobility options like collective transport and cycling, making sure that we can provide city services and deliver goods in our cities, and when we have space, providing for the private vehicle. Now, we've worked with an incredible network of people, many on this call today and who joined us this morning, from all around the world, from over 40 countries and 70 cities. And we've worked together to help to define and challenge people to ask what's possible. It's fundamental that we get our new street designs right as our cities are growing and expanding. But what's even more critical is that we challenge the spaces we already have and that we demand more of that space to serve more of our population. And instead of taking a functional classification approach of our streets where we get to basically choose if we have an arterial or a connector or a local street, instead we take a people and place approach to street design in the Global Street Design Guide. And we demand that every street design look at the desirable outcomes of proactively supporting healthy and safe environments, of livability and quality of life, of access for all modes of transportation, looking at how the designs support environmental and economic sustainability, and of course how we can do that in a fair and equitable way. We have 10 core design principles in the Global Street Design Guide. We start, as I mentioned, with our most vulnerable. We make sure that our streets are safe and that they must promote healthy environments. We remind ourselves that our streets are public space. They're public space. That means they belong to all of us and we all have a right to be there. Our street designs play a fundamental role in the ecosystems of our cities, that they must be multimodal and make sense for the context that they're situated in. We know now more and more evidence that great street designs support great businesses. And we have to remember that we don't experience our streets in plan or section like we often see them in drawings. But as human beings, we experience them in real time with all of our human senses. So we have to think about all the 4 planes of the room of the street, not just the ground plane. And our favorite one is that streets can change and we all can take action now to start to transform them. When we look at designing for people, the Global Street Design Guide breaks down the needs of all the different users, from pedestrians and cyclists to transit riders and private motorists, to those operating freight and moving goods and delivering city services, and as we mentioned, for people doing business. And most of you have probably seen diagrams like this, where we look at the amount of space taken to move 50 people. And as our cities are growing and expanding, we have to ask ourselves, do we want to move 50 people like this? Or do we want to move them in a multimodal approach? And one of the diagrams in the Global Street Design Guide, we show the very same space designed, one for a car-orientated street, moving around 12,000 people an hour, or as a multimodal street where we can move almost 2.5 times as many people in that same space. So it's very logical, the numbers all align, that we really have to make more efficient use of our space, of our street. So the global guide, I'm just going to go quickly to give you a taste of what's in there. But we touch on the scale of all of our different users and have the person in the wheelchair as our design vehicle for our streets, not the vehicle moving the private car. So we take each of these sizes, but we also look at the larger scale. What does it mean to create a continuous, safe, and comprehensive network for each of these users, making sure that they're comfortable and provide access to the city? We look at the different facility geometries and basic dimensions for each of the users and start to break down what makes sense for different parts of the city in different contexts. Of course, beyond this, it's not just one piece of infrastructure, but a whole toolkit of elements that need to be provided for each of these users to provide a comprehensive and enjoyable and safe experience. And the Global Guide also goes in and touches on the other pedestrian infrastructure, important things like crossings and refuge islands and sidewalk extensions, thinking how we can reuse the space and shift it from one user to another. When we talk about designing for place, it's critical we not only think about the built environment, but of course the natural context that we're working in, the local social and cultural context, the environment that makes each street design look and feel like it makes sense for the place that it's in, and of course the economic environment that informs each and every design. And the Global Guide has a series of regional context considerations, from looking at the demographics and the density to the largest street networks and block sizes, making sure we're taking into consideration geographical features and vulnerability to natural disasters. And then we look at the immediate context. What's the detail of the street activity at each stretch or each block? Where should the street furniture go? How do we maintain a human scale within the right-of-way? And how do we think about the edges of our buildings so that they're transparent and have frequent entrances to keep active and safe and engaging environments? How do we think about the local climate and opportunities for green infrastructure in each and every street? And you know, it's fundamental that we remind ourselves that we can't just have one street design and apply that along an entire corridor. As the context changes, so must our designs, right? So we see an example here where one street is like a neighborhood main street, but a few blocks down the road, you know, maybe a new transit system has entered the network. The density has changed and the land use has changed, putting different demands on the street and therefore demanding different design decisions to reflect that. A few blocks further down, in this case in a dense urban area, we see the same space transformed into a transit mall, with dense areas with a lot of people and high volumes of pedestrians put the need for that space to be prioritizing transit and people. And a big part, as I mentioned, is around street transformations in the Global Street Design Guide. There's almost infinite number of street typologies, but we focus on 5 key types, from pedestrian priority and shared streets to neighborhood streets, large streets, and then of course the things that don't quite fit, which we put in special conditions. And we show here what we've done is we've taken examples from our network from all around the world and abstracted these into 3-dimensional models where we take the types of conditions we find every day, where sidewalks are blocked and chaotic street environments make it unsafe and unpleasant for people, and show what's possible and how these can be transformed, like this example of a pedestrian priority street. Similar to the example we heard this morning from Copenhagen, where we also collect metrics from real-life case studies, here showing a huge increase of pedestrian space, of pedestrian volumes, and in turn a huge improvement in the amount of space for stopping and staying activities, as well as outdoor cafe seating. We see contexts like this neighborhood Main Street. Here, again, cluttered sidewalks, congested streets, and unsafe spaces for people to cross. And instead seeing these redesigned so that dedicated space for cyclists and other users allow a much safer environment to be created. Wider sidewalks allow for green infrastructure and for businesses to spill out and activate the sidewalks. Kind of similar to this one in New York City, where this transformation of the addition of protected cycle infrastructure saw not only a decrease to injuries but to pedestrian crashes, a decrease in overall speeding, and at the same time, a huge increase, 49% in retail sales. We touch on smaller examples like shared streets and commercial areas, streets and contexts that were designed before the automobile was the heart of the city. And so we show how this can be given back. A little like this example in Auckland in New Zealand, where these new networks of shared streets again saw increases in pedestrian volumes and consumer spending. We see people feeling safer and an overall decrease in vehicle volumes. And then large, grand streets like this one, modeled off an example of one of our case studies in Argentina, where we show how this can be transformed to much more efficiently move people safely in dedicated space for cyclists, for multiple lanes, for BRT in this case, moving in each direction, yet with at-grade crossings for people to safely connect from one side to the other. And here in Buenos Aires, we saw this one example with an almost 100% reduction in crashes, a huge reduction in bus travel times and moving people more quickly, and a wonderful improvement in the air quality. More and more we're seeing examples where elevated structures that once divided our neighborhoods and our cities are being torn down, redesigned and rethought to instead provide connections and reasons for people to come together. Like Seoul in Korea, where not only was this elevated highway removed, but a river revealed beneath it. At the same time, an increase in bus ridership, a decrease in vehicle volume, and an improvement in air quality. So often we took complete disregard for our natural context and we paved over our streams and our rivers. And now with Streets to Streams, we're showing how these spaces can be unveiled or revealed to again provide a new heart to a community instead of divide them. A bit like in Paso Robles in California, where we not only saw a decrease in average speed, but new trees helped to improve water treatment. We have a chapter on intersection transformation showing similar examples where raised intersections can be added to slow vehicles to provide at-grade, safe, accessible crossing for people in the street, a bit like they've been doing in Fortaleza in Brazil just in this past year, this one showing a mid-block crossing. Or how slip lanes that are there that invite vehicles to move at fast and at speeds can be redesigned to provide protected areas for cyclists and more space for safe crossings, green infrastructure and transit facilities. A little like has been tested here in this example in India, with cones and chalk where the space can be rethought and tested. And one of our favorites with public plazas, where we see geometries coming together at crazy angles and underutilized space that are being used to store cars, being rethought and being transformed into places for people, drawing from examples in Buenos Aires and Argentina to New York City, where we see car parks transformed into plazas. And of course, one of the most famous ones in Times Square, where the closure of one of the busiest intersections in the world saw an increase in ridership for buses, almost 3/4 of the people preferring this. We saw an overall reduction in crashes and once again, not surprising, an improvement in the air quality. Now, there's over 20 case studies from all around the world in the Global Street Design Guide that we invite you to take a look at. We also touch briefly on process and metrics, understanding that there's different, people have a different role to play at different parts of the process. So we touch on everything from engaging stakeholders and analyzing the site through project implementation to make sure we're looking at ongoing maintenance and management, evaluating the impacts, and of course constantly looking at how we can update our policies. We look at who's involved in shaping streets and how do we get the right people to the table and to identify what each of these stakeholders care about, what their interest is, and how we can work them all in together. And when we talk about measuring and evaluating the street, we have three primary areas. We look at the physical and operational changes of our street. So can we add new sidewalks or new cycle facilities? Can we improve the signal timing for a crossing or add new trees? And how do these physical and operational changes have an impact in how people use the street or the activity that occurs there? So we need to measure, if we add more cycle facilities, are we getting more cyclists? If we widen the sidewalks, are we having less people walk in the roadbed in an unsafe manner? And of course, the long-term resulting impacts of making sure we're working towards better air quality, less deaths on our street, and overall healthy environments. And the Global Guide touches on the what and the when, the why, the how, and the where to help people go and measure these for the projects that you're working on in your corner of the world. At the same time, we're developing metrics and sheets where people will eventually have them on our website so people can take these and measure them, use them to measure the projects that they're working on. And to give you a tiny taste of how we're applying some of these strategies in the 3 cities that we're working in, we're now using the Global Street Design Guide to inform policy and design guidance at the highest level in city governments. We're trying to make sure that local staff in these contexts can come to trainings and have and build capacity in the local staff and the consulting and the academic institutions, whether that's through a traditional presentation space or more hands-on with puzzle pieces. We do community engagement, knowing that the locals, residents in a neighborhood are the experts of that space. We want to know from them, how do they move about, where do they feel safe, which are the strategies that they think make sense for them. So this is a big part of the work that we're doing on the ground. We're doing one-day pop-up transformations that help people to look and see and feel a different alternative for the streets that they may have never had the chance to previously imagine. This one in São Paulo in Brazil, or here in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where we went out and used chalk and planters, and in one day we're able to take the chief engineer and show him that a bus could still make that turn, and it was okay to reclaim those corners, to shorten the crossings, and to give them back to pedestrians. And sometimes these pop-up events help us work towards longer-term interim transformations. Here, a plaza in Bogota, where a car park was transformed in one day with a local artist and performance, to now we collected metrics, and now we went back and did this with the city of Bogota in paint. So it's now there for 6 months, and we're measuring the impact of it. And we've just done the same thing. The chalk one you saw in Addis Ababa, we went back last weekend actually. A week ago today we launched this in Ethiopia, where we worked with a local arts college, and we redefined and redesigned this large swath of asphalt into a more pedestrian and human-friendly space. And as I mentioned, of course, we're collecting metrics and evaluating these, taking the outcome of these projects to understand what works and what doesn't, and to make sure we're improving our ideas and our designs along the way. So we officially launched this new resource, this new baseline for designing streets around the world last month in Quito at Habitat 3, and we're now embarking on an endorsement campaign for cities and organizations around the world. So please reach out to us if you're interested. We have we've had a wonderful time so far. Sorry, I've lost the presentation. We've already had advanced praise from many wonderful leaders in the industry, and many of the mayors here, from ex-New York to Paris and Rio to Mexico City, to Sydney, and to Santiago. So we hope that this new resource provides the tools for you to reimagine, reinvent, and redesign safer and more sustainable streets in your context. Our challenge to you is to write about it, to ask for it, to demand it, and of course design it. For those of you that have the money, to please fund it, and to ultimately just do it, to fight for streets that put people first. And so collectively, we can each work towards changing streets to change the world. So thank you. We encourage you to sign up at our website to stay in touch with what we're up to, and to please tell us about the amazing work you're each doing in your corner of the world so we can help to spread the word to more people, so we can save reinventing the wheel and to share as many lessons as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sky. If you have any question to Sky or any of the presenters today, please use the question box that is located in the GoToWebinar control panel, generally in your right side of the screen. I'm going to now present our second panelists today that are joining us from San Francisco. We're going to hear from Robin Abado-Cubillo and Ilaria Salvadori. Robin is a planner and urban designer at the San Francisco Planning Department. His current and past work has focused largely on public space design, management, and policy. He currently manages the Central Waterfront Dogpatch Public Realm Plan, a multi-agency effort to scope and program streetscape and open space infrastructure projects in one of the city's most dynamic neighborhoods. Robin also has core staff with San Francisco Pavement to Parks, helping to test community-generated public space idea and stewardship models in neighborhoods across San Francisco. Ilaria Salvadori is an urban designer with the City Design Group at the San Francisco Planning Department. She currently manages the Pavement to Park program, a successful public space initiative aimed at reclaiming underutilized space in the city and turning it into vibrant catalyst spaces for San Francisco neighborhoods. While at San Francisco Planning Department, Ilaria has helped create the Mission Community Market, the first open-air market in the Mission District, as well as several community-based projects that rethink streets and multimodal inclusive spaces for people. So I'm going to hand it over now to Robin and Ilaria, and they're going to present the Pavement to Park program.
Hello everyone, here is Ilaria Salvadori from San Francisco with Robin Abad. Thank you for inviting us to this evening, and I think it's very exciting for us to present tonight. We have some information about our program, Pavement to Parks. We're going to talk about the program in general, how it works very briefly. I know many of you probably know already a little bit about it, but we just want to go over the main goals and objectives of the program. And also we present two brief case studies that are the, they're representing two ways of working in the street. They are, one of the two is actually featured in the guidelines that you put together, the global design guidelines. So it's always interesting just to talk a little bit more about it for the people who are familiar with the book already. And the second one is the alley design. That's very interesting for the street closure aspect of it. So the origin of the program, it really goes back to New York, and the Transportation Commissioner, Janet Sadi-Khan, she came to San Francisco in 2009, and she was very inspirational for many leaders here in San Francisco. Just rethinking, as Kai was presenting, the view of the street in a new way. So looking at streets not just as places where cars can go through efficiently, but really thinking about streets in a way that it's innovative and new places for people to gather, new opportunities for public space, for multimodal transportation and all that. So when at the time our mayor was Bloomberg, he saw the presentation about what New York City was doing, and he was very inspired, and that jump started our program in 2009. There was very pilot at the beginning. Now I think it's much more established. But the idea was to really demonstrate residents and people in San Francisco what we could do just by taking some little pieces of right-of-way and transforming them. So our approach is obviously, you all know this already, but it's the approach that Sky was talking about towards the end of the presentation, really taking short-term actions to address long-term change. And this is obviously the slogan, also the generally of practical urbanism around the world. And really the model of 1 day, 1 week, a short demonstration to a trial of 1 to 3 years, and the permanent public space is really a model that has been repeated in our projects and in different forms. But we think that it is a successful way to inspire communities around the city here in San Francisco, just demonstrating what can be thought maybe impossible at first by engineers and other even residents themselves. So using the 1 day approach to inspire people and then go back with the more substantial trial. This is what you see in our case study. We obviously have been experiencing, as I was saying, the program started really like a pilot, and we had 4 pilot parklets at the beginning and 4 pilot plazas. It was very small scale, program in the sense that the breadth of the program was not very big, but then it became a much more established program. As you can see in the next slide, we have a lot of diverse projects, and many of these are grassroots projects that start with community requests. I'm sure some of you will be curious to know how we get projects in the program, and we can talk about that maybe in the Q&A, but the idea is that there are many sources of ideas. Sometimes we have ideas ourselves in the office, sometimes community comes forward and asks for the project. Agencies, other city agencies are interested in working with us, and also obviously other sources of innovation come forward, like the Market Street Prototyping Festival, which is really on the sidewalk. We have the Power Street Promenade, for example, is a multi-block parklet that becomes almost like a civic parklet, civic scale. It's in the most tourist street of San Francisco, where thousands of tourists per day come through this space. And so forth. We have we have more than 60 parklets right now. We have several plazas. We have street closures, and we also work with on the school site, the playland at 43rd Avenue. So we are not going to obviously go through these projects, but just want to give you a sense of from building facade to building facade, what kind of intervention we've been doing in San Francisco. So they really go from the building itself to the sidewalk, the parking lane, and the right-of-way. And yeah.
It's also been really exciting for us as the core staff here at Pavement to Parks to see how this idea and this technique has been adapted and replicated by other groups in the city. So this slide shows a number of other projects that were actually developed outside Pavement to Parks as a formal program. Projects undertaken by the mayor's office, Parks and Rec, arts and other cultural institutions throughout the city. It's been very, very exciting to see this real explosion and this growth of deploying this tactical technique to really make change and convert places for people. Pavement to Parks has worked over the last 6 years with a whole variety of different types of institutions and organizations. We really are a come one, come all format type program. It does mean that there is no one-size-fits-all approach necessarily for delivering to a neighborhood on a public space project. We've been very privileged to grow past your typical cafe owner or restaurateur and start working more with museums and art galleries, educational institutions and other cultural institutions to bring their missions into public space through these experiments. There's also, depending on where in the right-of-way that we're working, different types of roles and obligations that our partners will undertake. We are an application-based program, which means that we are present to provide facilitation and assistance with the technical and procedural aspects of getting a permit and doing design review, but really the ideas are generated by these partners. We are here merely to empower neighborhoods and their own desires and their own wishes for seeing public space in their communities transformed. To that end, our program has developed over the years a series of wonderful, important technical assistance documents. If such a thing can be wonderful and exciting, we get great feedback from our communities that really synthesize all of the learning and the best practices and the lessons learned that we have acquired over the last few years. So all of these materials are available via the Pavement to Parks website, and they're organic living documents. They change in order to incorporate new design standards, new ways of thinking, new lessons learned from our portfolio of projects. Because we're an application-based program, we have over the years also developed a pretty refined sensibility about what is going to make a successful public space project. And we've distilled those down into some of these high-level bullets here. Basically, there's the geospatial as well as the social. We need to make sure that the site is appropriate, but also in terms of the existing social fabric or the potential to build capacity in that social ecosystem to support the project over time. These are the things that we look out for when a community group or another city department or a community institution comes forward with an idea. We are happily, I think, overwhelmed with requests. So this also helps us be really focused and strategic about where we can make the most impact and have the most change.
So we would like to illustrate briefly a couple of examples of work. The first project that it's actually included in the design guidelines is Persia Triangle. So this is a project that we decided to work on in the Excelsior neighborhood. It's a neighborhood in San Francisco that it's pretty diverse, and it's along one big transit corridor, which is Mission Street. So the triangle, what we call triangle, is really a triangular area. There are three streets intersecting each other, and one is Mission, which is a very high transit and commercial corridor. And then we have other two smaller streets, Ocean and Persia. So this project started in a few years ago, actually, 2013, and we've been starting meeting with the neighborhood. The neighborhood actually approached us together with the office of the supervisor, district supervisor, John Avalos. We were asked to look at this corner, which obviously from just a superficial look, it looks like a nondescript corner with a big car repair lot in the middle of it. And so we will never, I think, consider if the community didn't approach us to request that we look at it, and they define the heart of the neighborhood. So we thought that was very curious that this would be the heart of the neighborhood. But after meeting with the community, we realized that this was actually a crossroad for a lot of pedestrian activity. The buses go through Mission Street, and they really are busy with commuters, peak hours. There's a very good commercial activity on the corridor. And so we realized that this actually was a place that, because this neighborhood doesn't have any plaza or anything like a civic space, this was probably a place that people were looking at in terms of meeting at the corner by the big sign. And so we got interested in it. There was also work by the transportation agency to traffic calm this area. And the investment that was, was going to be made in this area was really not looking at this corner, but looking at other intersections off this site. And so we actually started working with them, thinking, well, people want a plaza at this corner. Why don't we just look at this corner first and see if we can maybe bring investment to this corner instead of in any other area around here. And so it was a double, so it was both working with the agency and working with the community, and we decided to really come up with a vision for this and a strategy to implement it. So this was a vision for it that we came up with. I can go back to it later to look at it again, but the idea was to really think about the corner as a corner plaza with a decorative crosswalk. So what we did is that the phase one, we had this visioning exercise where we really got together with all the stakeholders of the community and came up trying to listen what does it mean to have the, for you, the heart of the Excelsior. And we realized that people were thinking about it as a special corner. A special corner with traffic calming, also some, going back to what Sky was talking about, pedestrian safety. There were some collisions around here, and so, also the crossing of the street was not the safest across. And so it started becoming like almost like an opportunity for the community to gather and really start talking to each other. So we did a one-day installation during a festival, a street festival, and at that installation we had the opportunity of thinking not only about one street but just doing a corner plaza, which at the beginning was not the idea. So I think, again, just this one-day interventions are really effective to envision what you can do and just really visualize it on the ground. And so after the first, that mock-up intervention of one day, we realized that the community was very excited, and so we decided to do, we proceeded to do what we call phase one, which is an interim plaza from September 2014 to June 2015. And so we were able to create with the volunteers or residents and the MTA, the transportation agency. For the first time, they painted this crosswalk with dots, which was never done before. They were very excited about working with us, that team, and it was new for them too. We had the landscape architect to install these planters with seating, and so at the end we had this really new space that people could really sit down and look at passerbys or meet up, and it was a very successful space that people really loved. And with this action, we were also able to influence the design of the permanent space. So that, I think, the reason why we present this space, and it's a short presentation today, there is more obviously, but I think it's just to show also the potential for influencing the public space design on the long term that sometimes is talked about, but I think what differentiates public agencies from guerrilla projects is really the idea of having a strategic approach to the tactical and thinking about the future of the space. So this is the new design. It looks really dry, right? But the idea, the important thing is that the pedestrian bulb out between Mission and Ocean on the right end of the screen, top right end, it's really what counts. So that bulb out was not supposed to be there, but because of community influence, that sidewalk extension, which is very simple, it was actually the way that we were able to bring a new public space at this corner. So I think there are a lot of other things to be talked about, but the idea here is to bring both the community participation and being able to work with communities on transforming their spaces, and definitely thinking about even a modest corner space in any corner of the city can become a very meaningful space for people who live around it, and it can be worked out also with transit going through. And for what concerns the next steps, we have a new landscape that we are going to open in the following weeks, and we are working. We would like to work with the owner of the lot to put probably maybe some food carts on the edge of the here at the edge. You can see that pink truck in the rendering. So the idea is to bring some food trucks to line the plaza and bring some more activity on the corner. There are also opportunities of closing the street, Ocean Avenue, for fairs. Now that there is a crosswalk painted, and so this project can be catalyst for larger interventions in phases. And so this is, I think I'll leave the time for questions at the end, but if you have any questions, but we'll talk about the second case study now.
Great, thanks, Ilaria. So we'll quickly cover another overlooked and underutilized place, or formerly underutilized and formerly overlooked place. This is Annie Alley Plaza. Annie is one of the tertiary alleys that we have throughout our downtown, so it's a very different land use context, very different situation than that of Persia, which we just looked at, the former being in one of our more outer neighborhoods, as we sometimes call them, a little bit more of a suburban condition, whereas this is right smack in the heart of downtown. In supervisorial district number 6, which it has the lowest per capita open space of any other district in the entire city. So this is what Annie Alley looked like for many, many years. As you can see, it's one of those back alleys in any downtown, really, in North America and in many places in Europe. We have a tiny pedestrian facility. 90% of the right-of-way is given over to vehicular circulation, and as you can see here, this was taken in the mid-afternoon, not even that well used by cars, because the peak hour usage that we see with private automobiles and other automobiles is really just in the morning and in the evening. So this site was identified by the Yerba Buena Community Benefit District, which is the local benefit district or business improvement district for this part of San Francisco, as one of the sites in their entire jurisdiction that they could experiment with in terms of bringing more public space to those who work and live downtown and visit downtown, as this is within striking distance of many of our city's best museums. Over the course of 2-3 years, local partners such as the San Francisco Planning and Urban Research Association, which is next door to this site, as well as the Community Benefit District, did a number of small day-long, week-long demonstrations. They held picnics, there were movie nights, and they found that there was actually a huge appetite for not only these types of programmatic offerings, but for the use of this space at all times of the day and in different days of the week, both the weekend and the weekday. So this really propelled both the benefit district as well as other local stakeholders towards us, towards Pavement to Parks. We worked with the Community Benefit District as well as a local landscape architecture firm, Conger Mosque Yard, to develop through an extensive, almost year-long community process, a number of different schemes, potential treatments for this alleyway. In the end, balancing some of the needs that we had for emergency access, in particular our firefighting department, as well as some other considerations, came up with this light touch plaza. And so you can see that it was closed to vehicular traffic 24/7 and serves as a venue for all kinds of activities during the day, lots of facilities for just passive use, passive enjoyment, but then also spatially a really great setup for daytime cultural events and other offerings. I've got probably about 500 pictures of yoga classes and kids events and all kinds of other stuff that you can find on our Flickr page. But here I just wanted to pull one of the, I think, most dynamic images that we have of how this space is really performing and delivering on, again, this ravenous appetite downtown for more public spaces. We were really excited to see that usership was very diverse. We had older people, we had people from many different backgrounds. There are some SRO facilities for some of our less affluent citizens where they live on an assisted basis who use this plaza quite frequently. When it was closed in this configuration, we had seniors. There's also a very large senior population in this part of downtown. And so we were really happy and pleased with this as a demonstration project for San Francisco, and a temporary intervention for making change in our streets. We just wanted to touch on a little bit some of the types of analysis and observation and evaluation work that we do. Part of Pavement to Parks as a program is something that we call the Pavement to Parks Research Lab, which is a whole venue for independent researchers, either from academia or resident interns that we have here at Planning, to conduct evaluation and research work on our projects and our program. So we had a great resident intern here for a year, Jean Stroman, who did an extensive study of this space, adapting a lot of the methodologies that, that William White and Gale architects have used over the years to just really understand where people were over the time of day, what kinds of activities they were engaged in, what kind of postures they were taking, how they were engaging with the fixtures that were provisioned. And this is really helping us think through the potential next phase of Annie Alley. This installation, as you've seen it today, was actually de-installed this past fall. The Community Benefit District is reconsidering when in the near future they might do another version of the installation, learning from what we had learned during its 2-year life cycle. I just wanted to note that, you know, Pavement to Parks helps to facilitate temporary public spaces, experimental public spaces, and sometimes, not often, those spaces are, in the case of Annie, de-installed for a time or reconfigured. And that's part of the strength of this approach, I think, is that the investments that are made, the demonstrations that we do, can also be context responsive and situationally responsive. So for example, you'll see here just in this diagram that the Jesse Square Garage, which is a huge parking facility some blocks away, actually had some of their exits closed to facilitate the construction of a museum. The local Mexican museum is currently under construction on that block. As a consequence, there's only one way now that patrons can exit that facility, and that meant that in order to alleviate some of the drastic impacts, it was part of the rationale for Annie being, this version of the installation being removed for a time. This particular alley is actually being looked at as part of a larger environmental impact report, an EIR, for the larger district as part of our Central SOMA plan. It's one of the many tertiary streets that are identified for closure and being analyzed through an environmental lens for their potential long-term impact were they to be closed. So, you know, we all work in cities, and there are many, many different layers and many, many different factors that go into how we make decisions both in the short term and the long term about provisioning this public infrastructure. And I think that Annie's a really good case in terms of you know, all of the different influences that have shaped both the creation of the project and potential future next steps. So this is our website. This presentation and all the materials that you saw should be downloadable from here as well. You can contact Ilaria and I directly if you have questions about projects or the program. And then we always like to acknowledge that we're just a couple people in a much larger team of really talented and passionate urban designers, both here at the Planning Department as well as Public Works and MTA. So we salute our compatriots in other departments as well for the work that they do to bring public spaces to San Francisco streets.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Ilaria. That was great. Of course, it's also one of our case studies, and we're glad that you've been able to, you know, so nicely iterate and talk about the project. Our next speaker will be Amit Bhatt and Sarika Panda Bhatt. Amit is the Director of Integrated Transportation at WRI India, MR. He is based in Delhi and provides vision and leadership to all transport initiatives at WRI India. He is also part of various national and international committees on urban transport and road safety, and a visiting faculty at School of Planning and Architecture. Sarika is a manager at Cities and Transport with WRI India and is also based in Delhi. She coordinates various projects and activities in the Delhi region. She is one of the co-founders of Raahgiri Day, India's first sustained initiative towards use of alternative modes of transport. In fact, after the success of Raahgiri, she has been consulting and helping other cities, including Gurgaon, Karnal, Ranchi, Bhubaneswar, Kochi, and Chandigarh to replicate this concept. And without delaying it any further, Amit and Sarika, to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ankita, for this lovely introduction. So just to give you a background, and then after that I'll hand over to Sarika. So Raahgiri Day is basically an open street initiative that was started about 3 years back in Gurgaon. And the reason why, so typically what we have been working in this field for the last 15 odd years personally, and the reason, so when we talk about promoting walking and cycling, the response that we get from people at large, including policy planners, decision makers, is that no one likes to walk and cycle. And therefore, they will give all kinds of excuse, right from ranging the weather is hot, and or it becomes very cold, or it is rainy, to saying that these are relics, walking and cycling are relics from the past, and in fact we should look at some of the newer models of mobility, and like flying cars and things like that. And when we give them the examples from Europe or Latin America or even North America, the response that we get from the same set of people is that, but we are Indians and we are different. So what we wanted to do through this initiative was to kind of catalyze a bottoms-up approach, saying that if we give streets which are safer for people to walk and cycle, then irrespective of their income, gender, or other profiles, people do come to streets and they experience what we call as streets for all. And so that is a small experiment which we started from Gurgaon and has become big. But to walk you through the process and some of the impact which this whole campaign has created, I'll hand over to Sarika, who is also the co-founder of this initiative, and she will then probably walk you through the small 10-12 minutes presentation on this.
Okay, thanks, Amit. So I think both our previous presenter has said why we need this concept, and why we need to design the streets for all, basically. So this is Indian streets. Basically, this is Gurgaon, where where we have this 16-lane wide road, and this is the everyday traffic scenario, which is full of cars. And road safety, Sky already described it and told the statistics about it. India is number 1 in road fatality. 0.14 million people die every year in Indian streets. So and 70% of them are pedestrian and cyclists. So basically, we started this whole Raahgiri to reclaim the streets for this pedestrian and cyclist, and ensuring their safety and ensuring why they are important in the streets, and taking this message to the decision makers. Then I'll go to then air quality. Everybody knows, again, India is number 1 in the bad air quality, and we have 0.62 million premature death every year due to bad air quality. And just this air quality is just because we are planning and designing our streets, basically car-oriented cities. Physical inactiveness, again 0.43 million premature death every year, just because, again, the car-oriented culture that we have adopted, sitting in the car, going to office and coming back. No physical activity, like because there is a lack of public transport and there is no infrastructure for pedestrian and cyclists. So if people willing to walk or cycle also, they are not. So this famous statement, building flyovers or widening roads to solve traffic congestion is like loosening your belt to fight obesity. So we all have to be in diet, and diet from designing the streets for cars only, dieting from cars. So This is the whole concept, and you can see this is the Raahgiri where we started actually 3 years back in Gurgaon. Took around 5 kilometer of loop and cordon off for the cars and just allowed it for the people who can come there and walk, cycle, or doing yoga, skating, games, and it's for everyone basically, from grandchildren to grandparents coming and enjoying the street in the Sunday morning. The whole agenda behind it is whenever we talked about cyclist and pedestrian safety, the decision makers say who cycles or walk. Here everybody has cars, and so we have to design our streets for the cars. So there we said, okay, why not taking a bottom-up approach, and let's prove that people really willing to, or people are cycling and walking, because in Gurgaon also 33% people who walk or cycle, who are basically the underprivileged section. But after Raahgiri and through Raahgiri, it has been proven that the elite and middle class people in the city also wants to walk and cycle if we are providing safe infrastructure for them. This is Gurgaon. Basically, it's in suburb of Delhi with a million plus population, and it's basically a IT hub where most of the people, it's a cosmopolitan city where most of the people are from other part of the countries, came here and set up this city. This is basically in Haryana state. You can see this is the street, how it looked like in the Sunday morning. Everyone in their cycle or in the gear coming here, somebody dancing, somebody cycling, or doing different activities in the street. So basically police and the local administration is the partner with us to promote this activity, and through Raahgiri basically we started promoting safety of pedestrian and cyclists. So there were a lot of activity around it. You can see in the right hand side we developed this snake and ladder game to that it's basically a road safety game where you can play and know about the facts and figures of road safety, and a lot of painting competition and all that around road safety, and a lot of campaign basically. So from Gurgaon now we have 40 plus cities who are basically doing this campaign called Raahgiri or Raahgiri kind of event. Some cities, they come out with their own name called Equal Street, Happy Street, Cycle Day, and other things. So this is very important, the impact. After Raahgiri, 66% went on to buy bicycles, who were not cycling from decades actually, who only cycle in their childhood and all that. When they came to Raahgiri and had these safe streets where they can cycle freely without any fear of getting hurt by a speedy vehicle, they started cycling and they started enjoying it, and then they went back and bought cycles. 47% people, participants started using public transport system. This is again a study from Mumbai Equal Street, and a big impact actually, how people started looking the street through Raahgiri. Then business impact. When we talk to the administration and they ask us, there were a lot of marketplaces where we actually cordon off the streets, and the market owners were quite hesitant. We'll say, okay, our sale will go up if people will not come by car. How they will shop and all this stuff. But it has when we started Raahgiri, like we can see the changes. The shopkeeper themselves said, please change the timing, please increase the timing. The sale has gone up to 71%, and the footfall increases actually. People who came around, thousands of people coming there. So they started after Raahgiri, they go for eating or shopping and they go back home. Air quality again, where we monitor air quality where the Raahgiri happens, is decreasing for 27% in the average, what we see in other days and on Raahgiri days. So again, if you are actually reducing the car uses in the city, the improve air quality. And basically, there are a lot of campaign around focusing on universal accessibility. So there we one event dedicated to the disabled people, and where the disabled people and the common man came together and had lots of streets activity, like that's blindfold, football, cricket, and other things. Then engaging community. This is again what San Francisco is doing. We started doing this kind of stuff in Gurgaon and other cities also. Painting zebra crossing, reclaiming parking areas and converting into public places and all that. And we can see the drastic changes. The cars who were not stopping before zebra crossing started stopping before zebra crossing. And our Prime Minister himself, said that why not we witness Sundays as a cycle day, just people cycling or walking or enjoying the street without fear of getting crashed by a car. So these are few initiatives which has been taken, and a lot many examples. Actually, a lot many cities are coming up with public bicycle sharing system in the city. A lot many cities started cycling, constructing cycle tracks in the city. And there are a lot of which WRI is advocating in most of the smart cities. Basically, we are working with these 10 smart cities who already doing Raahgiri Day in their cities and transforming their cities into transforming their streets into public spaces basically. So this is some street design that is coming up in Bhopal, Bhubaneswar, Gurgaon, and other cities. And there are 5-6 cities who have started the public bicycle sharing system in the city. So lot many changes happening through Raahgiri, because it's not just the administration. Through Raahgiri, the people also quite sensitized towards why we need to design our street for people and not just for cars. So here I will end my presentation, and thank you so much for providing this platform to present our case study from India. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarika, and thank you, Amit. It's amazing to see this case study every time that I've heard about it, and it's amazing the kind of effort that you've made, especially in the Indian context, which is still very car dominating. And I actually live. I lived in Gurgaon, so I know exactly of the situation there. I would also like to take this opportunity right now to encourage all our attendees to have, if they have questions, please feel free to ask your questions. Fabrizio and I here will be moderating it and asking the panelists some of these questions. And meanwhile, till you guys can formulate your questions, I actually have a question for both Robin, Ilaria, Amit and Sarika, for all of you, and that is during these projects that you presented, which were some of the groups that were most challenging to convince? Because in both these projects we've seen that there's a level of community engagement that was involved, and we'd just like to understand that what were some of the challenges that you faced during the community engagement, how long did that last for, and what were some of your key takeaway from that process?
Do you guys want to go first? We could talk ad nauseum about this, so we'll let our partners in India begin.
Sure. Yeah, Ankit, I think it's a very good question. To me, I think one of the major stakeholders that were very difficult to convince were the shop owners, because in the Gurgaon Raahgiri route there are multiple markets and these shops open early morning, and for them I think they believe that if you restrict the motor vehicle, then your business will go down. And what we are trying to tell that it's not the motor vehicle which shops, it's the people who shop, right? And therefore if there are more people on streets, and if they are walking, they are cycling, the speeds are slow, there will be a much more propensity for them to buy. So initially they were very reluctant, but I think after a couple of events they saw the value, and then from being a stakeholder group which was totally opposing the idea, they really became the champions for this idea, and they really kind of helped the concept grow further. So yeah, that is my one segment which was very hard to crack initially. before they became supporters?
Well, I'd say for the Annie Alley Plaza project, I think moving through project development up through implementation, we happily didn't experience a lot of opposition. I think what the challenges came later once the street was actually closed and our daytime automobile commuters started realizing that, you know, their path of travel was constrained. So that developed into some ongoing community engagement work that we and our partners had to do, and you know, was exacerbated by, as I mentioned earlier, the closure to some of the egress points for a nearby parking garage, diverting a lot more traffic, vehicular peak time traffic, into this mid-block area. So I think, you know, that's difficult. Always, certainly, these road closure projects are attended by controversy at some point in their life cycle. So I would say that was probably the hardest thing to have to deal with. We had a lot of folks, as I mentioned, who lived in the neighborhood, worked in the neighborhood, who availed themselves to this space every day, and who the space was really serving. But then we also had folks who, you know, drive into the area, and that classic conflict definitely came up at this site.
Thank you, Robin and Amit, for your answers. So my next question is going to be about the temporary character of the interventions and the projects that you guys are showing. And one of the questions is how valuable is to do these temporary interventions, and on the other hand, how important is to pass from, you know, an interim temporary condition to a more permanent one?
Interesting. So I think it's a great question. I think in the presentation earlier on, we were talking about the approach of short-term, you know, short-term versus long-term, and how the short-term design can be actually really strategic to accomplish something in the long term. And so I think the way we look at them, you know, obviously these short-term interventions offer a reward, immediate reward in themselves. So, you know, there is a value to just doing a temporary project in itself, that it does generate a lot of joy, a lot of gathering of people and exchanging of ideas. So I think it's a very, even like the smallest project, very creative process, and a very creative event, you know, a process that can bring people together in a very positive way in the city. But I never personally lose sight of the long-term objective, and I think the long-term objective is really testing, using this project to test ideas that otherwise would not be accepted from either the general public, pointing to the previous question. You know, there is always a position of some kind to change. Everywhere you go, anywhere you are, I'm sure globally is true everywhere. And also to really shift the point of view of the profession, you know, so being able to communicate with engineers or other designers or decision makers of the value of something. I think the most powerful way to do it is really to try it. And so to Robin's point when he was showing evaluation, I think, you know, then what you do is really not showing it by installing, but also evaluating in a strategic way where you have installed and using the data to convince for a longer term change. So I do think that I'm very pleased with this new approach, and I hope that more and more will be used strategically in long-term projects. And you know, it's very easy to do, relatively easy to do, and it can have a long-term impact on the people's lives, really. Hello? Maybe we are not.
Amit, do you want to add something on the? I'm gonna now ask, then I'm gonna pass the question to Sky. I'm gonna ask a question about the Global Street Design Guide and if there is any idea of like translating the book, and also like question about the availability of the book online, and if there is any possible evolution and extension of the book in the future.
Yeah, sure. We're excuse me. So we're currently in the process. We're working with the City of Bogota to translate the guide into Spanish at the moment, and also with the City of São Paulo in Brazil to translate it into Portuguese. So we're very excited. We're just seeing the first chapters come back from them, and we're trying to figure out the more formal publication side of it. But through the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety, we've been able to start that process at least with the translation and proofreading and layout. So that's very exciting for us. We're also, now that we did the launch in Quito, and we've managed to start catching up on a bit of sleep after a crazy project, we're starting to put all the material online. So for those of you who know the other NACTO design guides, all the material is on the website, and so that will be probably by around February next year. So of course it's, you can't beat having the hard copy, but sometimes when you want to quickly type in something or Google something, that'll certainly make some of the material a bit more accessible. And one thing we really struggled with was, how do you pick 20 case studies, or just over 20 case studies from around the world? It's a pretty tough task when there's so many incredible transformations happening out there. And so one thing we're really keen to do as part of the network that we created to give input to the guide at the outset is to keep collecting case studies, to keep finding out what people are doing out there, to showcase it on the website, and to continue to grow the case study library so that we don't just have one case study for each of the typologies we touch on, but hopefully over the years we collect more and more. And as we've developed the metrics methodologies, our hope is that each of those case studies will have more comparable data so that cities can compare not only the after condition against the before, but also, projects against each other.
We've got one more question, and this question is from Nicholas Krebs, and he says, as a young roadway engineer working in a city that is car-centric dominated, the majority of my work is focused on designing multi-lane highways for large transportation agencies in order to improve movement of cars and trucks. What recommendations or advice do you have for young professionals to get involved in global street design movement outside of work? And in fact, I'd like to open this question to all our panelists out here, because this is some of the very common challenges that young professionals are facing working in some of the developing world.
Sure, that's a fabulous question. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. Winter in New York, I think. There really are a number of ways that people can get involved in this. I love that you bring it up to do it outside of your work, but I would also encourage you to not give up within your work, to also try and push these dialogues. A big part of what we're trying to do here is to shift the metrics away from just measuring cars and vehicles and their movement, and really look towards how do we talk about moving people in our cities. And, a lot of the diagrams we were developing for the Global Street Design Guide, our hope is that they can help you guys make those arguments and put them in front of people to show them, if we really have limited space in our cities, we really want to move as many people as possible, we have to shift that dialogue away from just moving cars. And with the metrics methodology, excuse me, that we're developing, our hope is that people through counting pedestrians and cyclists, through measuring air quality and crash data and taking user preferences, that we can broaden that dialogue and, So maybe someone says, all right, well, it might take me, you know, I hate this design. This new design takes me 3 minutes extra every day in my car to get to work. Well, okay, but that's a bad thing if the primary goal of your city is purely about moving cars. But if it's much broader and instead your top priorities are to save lives and to move people more efficiently and to move more people using the space of your street, then you know you can start to show positive impacts in these other areas, not just movement of vehicles. So, you know, as much as you can, I challenge you to put your hand up in the meeting, you know, to ask the hard question and to bring some of the other metrics to the table for people to understand. And outside of work, get involved in advocacy group, start your own, work and see how you can start your own pop-up events or transform in your own local community, ask what can be done, get people together, get some buckets of chalk, go and do it, show people what's possible. There's a huge amount you can do, and you know we really do need the next generation to come through and set the new agenda for designing our streets. Hopefully Robin and the rest of the crew can add as well, and I think obviously we've got some great lessons from India.
If I might jump in, this is Robin in San Francisco. I think everything that Sky just said is so right on. You know, I think we do have the opportunity and the role as folks who sit within the bureaucracy to help push, even if they're just conversations and they don't result in new standards or new approaches, to do that in a proactive and friendly way is definitely you know, that's a battlefront that we should all be trying to advance upon. I also want to echo Sky's advice to get involved in your local community, you know, and in your local bicycle coalition. You know, maybe your city has a walk advocacy group or a senior or youth mobility advocacy group. Go out and get involved with those folks. And sometimes from within the bureaucracy, we're left unsated and a little bit wanting in terms of wanting to make the kinds of change as quickly as we want, and there are other ways that you can feel personally satisfied as a human being and you know, as a citizen. I also would recommend trying to identify allies in your own organization and in other government institutions. So you know, there are like-minded folks everywhere, and even if it's just so that, you know, as informal as getting together every other week over beers to talk and dream and to begin to identify folks who have the same kind of agenda for change that you do, will translate somehow along the line into an opportunity for you to capitalize and leverage change. The same goes for, you know, folks in elected offices. You know, there are young, idealistic, bright people in elected office who are also looking for ways to demonstrate change and to make some kind of significant, meaningful movement. So find allies in your own town, in your own city, who are sort of operating at that governance level, and you guys will sustain each other and encourage each other, but then you'll also, I guarantee it, find some way, some chance to do something.
About
Yeah, hi, Sarika this side. So, of course, it's a challenge. Even when we started and talking about, you know, how to design a street and road widening or underpasses or foot overbridges are not the solution. It's really a very difficult task, but I think it's a doable task. I know the mindset in India is shifting now. From you know, designing these streets for cars to designing the streets for people. The challenges, and one of the good things is like we have lots of international case study to showcase, see how this city has done the mistake and we should not repeat the mistake kind. And talking to the decision makers is very, very important, and just talking, multiple time talking about this, getting external speakers to talk about this. Sometimes they listen to, if I am getting my WRI colleague from US and talking about this thing, it really matters. So all this kind of discussion, dialogues, lot of conference, taking them to the multiple workshops or taking them to the study tours really helps. It helped in India basically when we took the people from Ministry of Urban Development or Ministry of Road Transport. We took them to Bogota or Brazil or other cities and showcase them that see how the cities would look like, the streets would look like, which is promoting public transport and walking and cycling. And it really impacted a lot. And major outcome of this is, out of this, in the whole smart city project, the whole focus is on, public transport, walking and cycling. So very important to basically showcasing the right things to the decision maker. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarika, and thank you to all our panelists here who've contributed greatly to this session and made it so enriching and informative. I'd like to wrap up the session today and encourage all our participants to visit our website at globaldesigningscities.org and sign up for our newsletter. This is our third webinar series, and we'll probably come up with some more exciting new webinars next year. So in order to stay tuned for that, please do visit our website and sign up for our newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at Global Streets. And we look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to reach out to us if you are working in cities that are willing to endorse the Global Street Design Guide. And we hope to have you participate again in our future webinars. Thank you so much. Thank you, Matt and Island Press, for hosting us. And it's pretty late out here, so good night to everyone in the Eastern time zone, and good morning to those in the on the other side.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
Están